my talk is going to be more about the forgetting part of commemorating, which Antonio mentioned. And some famous historians and sociologists have argued that in order to remember, to commemorate, you have to selectively forget. And I want to talk about the histories of Bloomsbury that we've selectively forgotten. When I came to UCL in 2012, radically different was our tagline. And when we taught the students in the first year approaching history module on biography, for example, we present Lytton Strachey and Vanessa Bell and these other radical figures, and we tell students about radical Bloomsbury. I want to tell you about Imperial Bloomsbury in the 50 years or so before there was a UCL to be radical. So I want us to rethink Bloomsbury as a place of empire, a place of slavery, a place of colonialism, which actually endured in the early UCL years, and indeed in the later UCL years, witness Francis Galton, for example. So that's where I'm starting, and to do that, I'm going to tell the story of the Davidson family, starting with these two girls, Eliza and Margaret. Eliza was known as Betsy, or at least I think this is Eliza and Margaret. I have another version of this paper, this talk, which focuses on gender history and women's history. And in that case, I point out in a rather feminist way that the fact that we don't know which of these daughters this actually is quite indicative of women's history. Kind of one woman stands in for another. But I'm not going to go there in today's talk unless you ask me in the Q&A. So these two girls are living on Gower Street in the 1780s. But they're not born in London or Bloomsbury, they're born in Madras. And the story I want to tell you about them is, I think, integral to the story of UCL's environs and Bloomsbury in the 18th and early 19th century. Next slide, please. So, what did Gower Street look like in the 1780s? One of the best ways to find out about the history of London is to use that wonderful database, Old Bailey Online, and look at who stole stuff from Bloomsbury in the 1780s. And we can tell here, the first case that I could find is of roof slates being stolen in the 1780s as new houses were going up. And the poor chap who was taken for that spent quite a lot of time being punished for having taken these goods. So 1780s, the thing about Gower Street and the environs where we are is they are incredibly green. The Euston Road doesn't exist. Everything that's Euston Road in north is fields. So it's actually a salubrious environment for an aspiring middle-class family to have a home. And because it's a salubrious environment for a middle-class family to have a home, it attracts a lot of new imperial wealth, both wealth that's connected to India and wealth that's connected to Caribbean slavery. Next slide, please. So, the two girls pictured in that image, possibly Betsy and possibly Margaret, but definitely one of the five Davidson girls, are living with Mrs. Chitty of Gower Street. And again, Mrs. Chitty of Gower Street, we know so little about her. There's no image of her. I've just mocked up some 18th century ladies there to give you a bit of a sense. But we do know that Mrs. Chitty of Gower Street, A, was a spinster. She's called Mrs. because she's effectively running a business, raising the children of imperial parents who send them back to Bloomsbury to be made English. And she's also, we know, of Huguenot stock. And that's a really important part of this story. Next slide, please. So, the Huguenots, as you know, are French refugees. They're Protestants in France and in other bits of Europe. They're persecuted in the 17th and 18th century. And they flee as refugees to London, as so many people have done through so many centuries of Britain's history. The uncle, or the great uncle of the girls in that portrait, Frederick Bagoo, like many Huguenots, sees empire as an opportunity to get back the wealth that he has lost through religious persecution in France. So he goes into the East India Company and he becomes a supercargo, which is a merchant plying the East India Company trade to China. It's an extraordinarily risky trade. But if you don't die, and quite a lot of people die, you can make a packet. And I have here a list of the Canton goods that Frederick Pigou brought back from the 1730s onward to London for auction sales. You've got silks, you've got tea. He's doing very, very well for himself. And he rises to be a director of the East India Company, which means he can place men in his family circle into East India Company employ. So one of the ways that Huguenot refugees make good is by going into the East India Company, possibly dying from that, but if they don't dying, becoming upper middle class, sometimes going into the aristocracy. And Mrs. Chitty is one of the women in this circle that benefits from this Indian trade. And she will then raise the children of her cousin, the Davidson girl's mother, who goes out to India to be married there, to participate in this colonial wealth. Next slide, please, Polly. So, the Family's East India Company links. Eliza Pigou, the mother of the girls that I showed you the portrait of, she goes to Bengal and she marries a chap called Alexander Davidson in Bengal. Alexander Davidson, painted here by Tilly Kettle, the same person who painted the girls in the portrait. Alexander Davidson's a Highland Scot. So first of all, we've got Huguenots from France going to India via Britain. Now we've got Highland Scots going to India via Jamaica very often, or in the case of Alexander Davidson, via West Africa. So we've really got quite a global colonial imperial mix going on here. Why is Alexander Davidson in Madras? Next slide, please. Davidson is the nephew of a Jacobite, so a Highland Scot refused to accept the Hanoverian succession. That Jacobite, as a political refugee, went to Jamaica to make his fortune. His family has been stripped of its fortune, not unlike the Huguenots. He goes to Jamaica, marries a very wealthy slave-owning widow, makes good as a merchant, and retires back to London to be a more genteel merchant there. And he joins together with other merchants to buy Bunce Island, also known as Bounce Island, which is a slave trading station off the West African coast. And of course, he's now got lots of patronage. Doesn't have any sons, so he sends his nephews out into the slave trade to the Caribbean, or in the case of Alexander Davidson, the father of the girls that I showed you, he sends them out at age 15 to Bunce Island to trade for human beings. And what do you trade for human beings with on Bunce Island? Well, Indian textiles are one of the things that you do. So within a few years, the uncle of the father of our daughters is thinking, well, actually, if I place him in the East India Company, I get direct access to those textiles, which on my slaving station off the West African coast, I can use to buy human beings at a better rate. So he gets the Alexander Davidson, father of the girls, a merchant's posting in the East India Company, and off Alexander Davidson goes from Bunce Island to Madras. Next slide, please. So, historians often talk about the triangular trade, and I just think that's wrong, because it's actually like a rectangle. That's because you have to add India into the mix. So it's not only about Britain's trading with the West African coast, trading with the Caribbean, trading back to Britain. There's also an element of much of this trade that encompasses the Indian subcontinent as well. So we have to put together the Atlantic world with the Indian Ocean world to see the full picture. And the biography of the family on Gower Street gives you that, I think, writ large. And that's, I hope, displayed in images there. Next slide, please, Chloe. So we come back to the girls. It's by these complex historical pathways that the Davidson children come to Bloomsbury, 6 of them. There's 1 boy and 5 daughters. One of the daughters dies young. They're the children of refugees, they're the children of migrants, they're the children of empire, and they're sat in the 1780s on Gower Street. And rather wonderfully, their mother's cousin, Mrs. Chitty, writes a daily journal of their lives to be sent back at intervals to their mum. And we also have a little bit of correspondence between Mrs. Chitty and the parents. We have extraordinarily detailed records of their life in Bloomsbury in the 1780s. Next slide, please. So we can see them go to the Foundling Hospital, where they hear improving sermons. We know what chapels they normally are worshipping at. One of them's on Charlotte Street, now one known for its restaurants and its chapels, it must be said. This is the Foundling Museum here. That's the British Museum before it was in its new building. And we have them traipsing around there, being educated into being English and British, being educated into the upper middle class, and being traipsed around literally walking with Mrs. Chitty on the streets that we've all walked, either as students or as staff at UCL. This is our place that is being carved out here. Next slide, please. We also know, because of this extraordinarily detailed letter journal, we know who they socialized with. And Mrs. Chitty is doing not only the work of socialization, she's doing political and economic work with these children. And we can follow them into the Luards' house, and the Luards, another Huguenot refugee family that's done very well out of the East India Company. We can follow them into each other's houses, and we can follow them into the slaveholding elite on Bedford Square. These are people, in this case, the Baileys. The Bailey is returned himself from the Caribbean with great wealth, becomes an MP, unsurprisingly opposes the end of the slave trade. These are the households that the children are socialized in. These are the households in which Mrs. Chitty sells textiles shipped back by her cousin from Madras to the ladies of Bloomsbury and West London. So the Baileys, the Luards, these are the people who have power in Parliament, power in the East India Company, and the children all know them from the age of 6, 7, 8, 9. They play with each other's children. Next slide, please, Chloe. We also have wonderful examples of the gifting. So Eliza Davidson, the mum of the girls, back in Madras, is getting ivory work boxes. She is getting these extraordinary textiles described in great detail in her letters, sending them back, and Mrs. Chitty is giving them to the women in her circle for intent. And in particular, Betsy Davidson, who is probably the one to the right there, Betsy Davidson falls in love with her cousin, so her father's sister's eldest son, who is also sent down to Gower Street. So there's a Highland strand of the family being sent down to Gower Street and then sent back to India. She falls in love with her cousin, and her mum then is determined to get the cousin a post in the East India Company so the couple can marry. So you get more gifts being given left, right, and centre to make that happen. The Mrs. Chitty and the mother are super determined. They kind of make a tiger mum look a little bit pathetic, right? So, and we have exactly these types of goods, which are in the V&A, about the types of goods that we can see circulating. Next slide, please, Zoe. Sorry, losing my mind. So, all the girls who survive and the boy are all sent back once they're teenagers at 14, 15, 16, depending on their sex and their stage of education. They're sent back to Madras. And that's where they're to make their career, to make their marriages. And indeed, all of the girls are married in Madras. All of the girls are bearing children in Madras, though they will all, if they survive, retire back to Britain. Eliza, the one who marries her Davidson cousin, she really hits the jackpot. She has 11 children in Madras, a 12th child when they come back to Britain, but her husband rises very, very high, partly because of his father-in-law's patronage, which ultimately comes really from Caribbean wealth in the company. And her husband is able to buy this absolutely amazing house in Edinburgh, which you couldn't tell anything about the origin of the colonial wealth from. And that, in a way, is where I want to leave you. This, which looks not so unlike the Wilkins building, is an example of the type of material culture that both embodies colonialism, embodies histories of slavery, embodies histories of empire, and deflects you from them. We've got the image of Wellington. Wellington was in India, was a major military figure there, but how is he remembered in British history? He's remembered for Waterloo. So I think when we think of the streets of Bloomsbury and we think of radically different, what I want us to think about is the way in which that's entwined with not radically, not so different. And I think that the story of Mrs. Chitty and the Davidson girls helps us to interrogate some of that history. Thank you very much.